Welcome back to the channel again, guys. Today I'm going to bring you a statistical analysis of Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts. I already did two of the quarterbacks in the college football playoff, Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence, and today I'm bringing you the other two. I put these two together because I think they're a little bit more similar, and so it'll be fun to see kind of the comparison and the contrast between the two. So I'm going to dive into that, but before I do that, as I did in the previous video, I'm going to let you know about two cool things I got going on. One of them being my Discord channel called Logic in Football, where I talk about college football, have discussions. It's a little bit less formal. You have opportunity to hear just kind of my loose thoughts before they get into a video. We can share memes and gifs and whatever you want to talk about. But also I have a Patreon account where you can support the channel through a financial contribution, and you can kind of see the tier that I have there so you can see what benefits come from that. But I would love for you to join that if you can. But other than that, let's jump into the statistical analysis. So we're going to start with me saying this. So these two had a similar number of passing attempts, but it seems that Jalen Hurts was a bit more efficient and a more effective passer overall, which may shock some people from his first couple of years. And this is despite the fact that Jalen Hurts had turned the ball over more than Justin Fields. So another key thing to remember too, is that both of these teams rely heavily on the run game. So the passing game builds on that. And that doesn't mean you take away, how good they are passing. It just means you keep that in mind, because their running game sets their passing game up really well. So we'll start with Justin Fields. Justin Fields had less than 3,000 yards passing overall in the season, but he had 40 touchdowns to 1 interception. So that ratio is just magnificent, by the way. But his yards per attempt was 9.6 yards per attempt. So what's really interesting is that Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence have the lowest average yards per attempt over the course of the season. I thought that within itself is something to see, especially considering that their styles of play are very different. But it could be that because both of them had a rocky month also in the season. Trevor Lawrence was the first, and Justin Fields' rocky month was in October, where they both dropped below 9 yards per attempt. So of course that's going to influence the total yards per attempt. But Justin Fields remained fairly efficient. He had a 67.5% completion percentage, which is those numbers. When you get above 65% completing passes, those are just great. You're doing a good job there. Now, obviously, that can be influenced by whether or not there's a bunch of short passes going on, or you're taking less chances, so you're more risk aversive. We can get into that a little bit more, but just a general look at the numbers right now, that's a good number to start out at. Like I said, he had 308 total passing attempts. He had 208 completions. Jump over to Jalen Hurts so you can kind of see the differences and the similarities. Jalen Hurts had 3,634 yards passing, so he had a little bit more than Justin Fields. But his yards per attempt is where he stands out. He had 11.8 yards per attempt, which is basically 12 yards per attempt, and I think that number led the nation. I think if this year started over again, let's go back to the beginning. If someone said Jalen Hurts is going to lead the NCAA in yards per attempt passing, how many people would say, yeah, I predict that? I don't know if that many people would, but he's having an outstanding year. 32 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He completed 229 passes on 309 passing attempts. So he has one more passing attempt than Justin Fields. So it's not that he has so many more passing attempts, which is why his numbers are higher. It seems that Jalen Hurts was just overall a more effective passer than Justin Fields was this year at 72% completion rate. So Jalen Hurts' yards per attempt and completion percentage is higher than Justin Fields. But let's look at how those rushing numbers also influence these teams. So let's look at the team rushing first. So let's jump back to Ohio State. Justin Fields' team rushing the ball 624 attempts total for 3,539 yards rushing. J.K. Dobbins led the team with 283 attempts. Master Teague had the second most attempts at 128, and Justin Fields was the third leading carrier at 123 carries. But he only had about 471 yards rushing, and his average was about 3.8 yards per rush. 5.67 yards per rush total for the team, but they carried the ball 48 times per game. Let's look at Oklahoma's. This is interesting. Jalen Hurts had 219 rushes. He led the team in carries, with Kennedy Brooks behind him at 145, Stevenson at 64, and Trey Sermon at 54 carries. They had 537 attempts, so almost 100 less than Ohio State. They ran for 3,266 yards rushing at 6 yards per rush, so they were a slightly higher clip of rushing yards per play. Both of these rushing games were highly effective. So they had 4 running backs with at least 50 carries, and that had an average of over 5 yards per rush. So as you can see, Oklahoma's running game was so efficient that I'm pretty sure that the play action and the ability to throw off of this was really effective for these teams. So I'm gonna use that and keep that in mind. So you can both see that. You can see that Jalen Hurts overall seemed to have had a better body of work. But so I'm gonna say, well, let's argue that the level of competition may be an influence. But I would say that you can't control how good the other team's defense is. You can control for it a little bit, though, by tempering the expectations. So Justin Fields played all FBS games. All 13 of the games were FBS. But, of course, not all FBS teams are made equal. I'm looking at you, Maryland and Rutgers. Jalen Hurts played all but one FBS opponent. They had one FCS opponent on their team. But let's dive deeper into the months. In the month of November, Jalen Hurts dropped to 69% completion percentage and had 8.4 yards per attempt. So obviously November was the hardest month for the Oklahoma team passing the ball with Jalen Hurts. You saw teams like Baylor kind of run in, TCU, they put a little more pressure. I think they had time to adjust to the Lincoln Riley, Jalen Hurts Oklahoma offense. They've seen teams struggle. They saw what they could possibly implement to slow that down. And those teams kind of used some effective means. So this was the worst month on average for Jalen Hurts, even though it didn't look like a crazy bad month. Like, they still were producing on offense. They still were able to run the ball. He took over running the ball a lot, especially in that game against Baylor. He looked like an amazing running back at QB, which he still is an amazing QB. Justin Fields, on the other hand, jumped to 11 yards per attempt in the month of November. So they kind of flopped here. It's worth mentioning that October was when he dropped to 8.1 yards per attempt. So as the season went on, teams adjusted to the Lincoln Riley, Jalen Hurts passing offense, but they still couldn't quite overcome it. And Justin Fields seems to have gotten a little bit better toward the end of the year. So if you want to learn something about these two, the games during the month of November might be good to check out to see what type of analysis you can get to see what you think will work in their respective games against, LSU and against Clemson coming up in the playoff. I think I'm going to leave it here because I want to go look at those games too, just to see what more I can learn and see how high the ceiling is for both of these offenses in the playoffs. Now, I want to know what you think about it. How well do you think these offenses are going to translate to these games? Do you believe the Justin Fields Ohio State offense will be able to do well against the Clemson defense? Do you believe the Lincoln Riley Jalen Hurts offense will be able to translate to doing well against the LSU defense? And how effective do you think that will be? Let me know in the comment section. I'll see you down there, and see you in the next video.